Dive and general sustain metas in Rivals have been a touchy subject since the start. At this point, I don't think anyone's enjoying Dive. The pros aren't having fun because they can't play the heroes, the casuals aren't having fun because Dive feels oppressive to play against, and the only people actually having any fun are the Smurfs. Heroes seem to be either blowing up instantly or surviving forever, and once you get to a rank where supports remember to press their buttons, it tends to be more of the latter. So we have either a Nat Captain America playstyle where he survives forever and is always in, or we get a bunch of straight line fights where everyone's sustaining, distracting, and waiting for ult cycles. There really never has been a better time to talk about this, and this discussion ranges from group hub metas to Captain America being terrible to the Rivals team's attitude to emerging gameplay loops like Dive Jeff. Hope you enjoy.
I just want a quick preface to everybody that's watching and doesn't know me.
Of course.
My name's Abby, and obviously English is not my first language. I do genuinely my level best to like get my points out there and speak on something. There's gonna be points where I will genuinely sound like a blithering idiot. Feel free to enjoy me making myself look stupid over video game pixels.
Happens to the best of us.
Alongside that, what I cherish a lot when it comes to video games and like what I try to look for in them is I have this weird obsession with like dev philosophy and kind of holding them to their words. This is kind of a problem we have in Overwatch, and also it's there in Rivals. So we will discuss all of that. It's going to be a fun conversation, and I think Relth is probably the perfect person to kind of come down as someone who's been in Overwatch's sphere as well as the rival sphere a little bit, where we have a lot planned.
Beautiful. Yeah, welcome. Thank you for talking to me, first off. I guess we start on Rivals. So what is your current place with Rivals, right? Where are you?
So, Marvel Rivals, first of all, I'm a huge Marvel fanboy, so it's right up my alley. It's everything I could have asked for. However, I can't deny that obviously there's certain issues within the game, but I also feel like going into that game, everybody needs to slightly temper expectations because the balance team and dev team have made it very clear what this game is gonna be. However, I do think that even then, there is an area where you can tone these things down or bring them a lot more in line with one another to be a lot more fair. So how much I play Rivals and Overwatch, I would say it's about equal to one another, maybe 60-40, a little bit more Rivals than Overwatch at the moment. But I have been playing and streaming a handful here and there, not really this patch for Rivals. And I really wanted to discuss with Relth because I wrote this beautifully long comment that decided it's going to delete itself, and that's what led to this glorious moment, where we wanted to talk about the GOAT's Rivals playstyle and mitigation stack. And I feel like that's something that was very interesting. Nobody's been talking about that just yet. And I guess I could start off like, in my opinion, so the first thing that I wanted to bring up was I believe Marvel Rivals has tools to deal with their little mitigation stacking and comms that are very like stick together and will never die, like the GOAT's style that we have now gotten accustomed to. I think shooters in general.
We should kind of like define how Rivals is playing right now to start with. From my perspective, and I haven't played it for a little while, Rivals is mostly playing as we stand at medium range from each other. Nobody really walks forward or backwards, apart from when you have a massive resource disparity between the teams. We farm, we press ultimates, then things start happening for the most part. Aside from that, there's kidnapping that happens of hooks. There's kidnapping that happens obviously Wolverine and Wolves from Groot and stuff like that, and that's kind of like assassinate stuff you can play. But from what I've seen, the actual dive play styles in that game at this point have been mostly disincentivized from individual players or from team players.
By any chance were you around for early season 2 meta for Marvel Rivals? Because we did have a dive meta, and it was horrible. And I kind of wanted to address that actually.
Sure.
Marvel Rivals, I'm sure anybody that's been through the PTSD of Captain America and Hulk fisting you across like the corner has not been the most pleasant dive experience we could have asked for. And that's because I wanted to justify that I think dive is a very, very tough comp to perhaps even make meta. I guess that's what the devs learned really quickly, simply because unfortunately, as far as the tanks and particularly 1 DPS, which I'll get to, go, they've incentivized the idea that, well, these dive tanks should have a lot more sustain on them. I think the worst offender of this was Captain America. And he was a huge defining force in Season 2, alongside Hulk, who paired with him really, really well.
Yeah, he's essentially a gnat, isn't he?
Yeah.
He doesn't really do much of anything while he's in. He doesn't really have that strong of pressure, but he can always win a 1v1 if you're both alone.
And one of the best things about Cap, that perhaps maybe it is a little bit underappreciated about him with his annoying cockroach playstyle, is he's able to force out resources, which then leads to a very aggressive dive. Now, we were calling this type of dive comp a very sustained focused dive, which was very much centered around Iron Fist, because he also followed this logic of, well, if you try to punish me, I'll just live more, you know? And then the rest is like from there, with the combined effort of Hulk and then Namor was kind of shoehorned into the comp just because he could peel for the supports really well, and the turret helped applied any extra pressure that you would expect it to apply.
Yeah,
So
100%.
over there,
He's great as a
yeah,
solo angular
yeah,
DPS, right? And
yeah,
quite a lot of dive
yeah,
comps use that dive pressure in order to put their DPS
yeah.
into a good place, and having the counter dive at the same time is amazing.
Yes, and however, on the flip side, I do believe there is a way to salvage dive in Marvel Rivals that doesn't necessarily revolve around, well, we're just gonna outlive everything and hopefully the dive works, and focus more on, well, we can time this engagement, get the kills we're looking for, and get out. It's kind of why I didn't really appreciate Spider-Man's changes, because he was one of the DPS that really leaned into this. That if I time my engage really well, I come in, I'll delete you. Magic as well. I think those two are like the safest picks that you could have. But then there's problems where Venom, I really hate Venom's design, or where his strength is, which is if he's in the chance of getting punished, well, he'll just outlive it by pressing one button. Instead, I would really like it if Venom, one of the things that I've suggested, Venom's hitboxes on his tentacles are absurdly garbage, right?
In terms of being just really hard to hit, or?
Yeah, they're surprisingly difficult to hit. I've had a discussion about this with actually some of the pros as well, and it's one of the reasons he's held back from pro play quite a bit as well. He's just too inconsistent in applying that follow-up pressure, which of course is worse when you factor how easy healing and all these other things are to bring up.
So much of your pressure is in just being able to get that headshot. You can basically double the pressure on people.
So what I would like, at least as far as addressing Venom's current state, would be perhaps let's tone down the amount of HP he brings to himself as he's engaging, but let's make the rest of his kit or his primary fire a lot more consistent, so that pressure that is being brought out by him is really good. It's just when he's actually taking those engagements by himself, he can't really do anything. It's very easy for a support to just do X, Y, and Z and survive. But compare that to perhaps a Hulk and very soon the Thing. They're just 10 times more consistent versions of the same character in being able to bring pressure. Same thing with Captain America.
See, why I want to pick this up is I think kind of like all of this seems to be intentional, right? From the dev team. It appears that Dive going pretty much infinite in terms of the amount of time they spend in and the resources they got in order to stay in, or being this slap it in the face, hit it really hard and something breaks. Like, that seems intentional to me for the most part. And I think one of the reasons for this is just the way that peel works in the game. So essentially all of the peel buttons are immunities that last for approximately 5 to 6 seconds. Would you agree with that for the most part? So we got,
to some extent, yeah.
Yeah, we got Cloak and Dagger Bubble, we got Loki Lamp, we got every single character has some sort
Loki
of
Lamp is the worst offender.
Yeah.
Loki Lamp is the worst offender, but hilariously enough, I might be somebody who's actually in the minority this, but I think Invisible Woman for support design was actually a step forward and not back as much as I kind of want to talk about it a little bit later because I think that is good. Ultron was also another character that I thought is much better than whatever the hell they were thinking when it came to Luna and Loki, and with the Cloak and Dagger Bubble redesign.
What I'm essentially seeing here is that for the most part what happened is that when they designed supports, everything was so strong in the game that they wanted to give them a very easy out. So every single support got this kind of like immunity ability that just made them slash themselves around them safe for a long period of time. So the result of that was essentially you either insta-kill, like the Black Panther, Spider-Man, that type of stuff, which it seems like the devs are more often moving away from at the moment. They don't seem to be too keen on the Spider-Man insta-kill. I think Black Panther and that sort of stuff is very obviously degenerate and not actually that healthy for the game, being able to just double dash out to double spear and just...
Oh, thank you. I agree. I hate Black Panther. I hate the fact that he's popping up now.
Yeah.
I'm so sorry. I needed to get that off my chest. It's really annoying to see him being defended.
It just seems like me that one of the problems they're finding is because they have this kind of like infinite peel, and they have... They're not really happy with these characters that can instantly assassinate through that peel or get there before the peel happens. The kind of like mid-length of time that you spend in has kind of like been disincentivized in the game for the most part. So you have like Captain America that obviously is pretty much infinite in terms of resources, and you have Spider-Man that is infinite in the way that they're always kind of in, and then you have the kind of like mid-range combo characters. But aside from that, I don't really see...
Personally, I would agree with Captain America, but I would disagree with Spider-Man. I think Iron Fist might be a better candidate for what you're saying over there.
Yeah, I feel like there's a lot of value in the game in distraction, because the healing resources are just so high that when you have these really high healing resources that essentially make anyone immortal that you look at, when they get peeled, they always survive. When they don't get peeled, they never survive. So the answer is just kind of like we're in this attention-based economy where the only value you can get as a dive character is forcing these cooldowns, living through these cooldowns, and then distracting so that other people can die while they're distracted. It's kind of like this weird situation situation where, because the resources in the game are so large, the ability to just drain those resources gets a bit abstracted away. For instance, like just being able to just go off on a moderate off angle and put pressure on the enemy team kind of does nothing in the game. I mean, you're either forcing out that cooldown and distracting, or you could just
I would disagree with that. Personally.
Go ahead. Yeah, go ahead.
So first of all, I think it is also a little bit more reliant on character by character basis. I do like one of the strengths of Psylocke and why she's a big like she has such a huge meta relevance, and even Human Torch is because they can safely take these off angles or different type of angles where they can force pressure, force out cooldowns, and then engage with the team. That's actually one of the reasons why Human Torch gets played a lot, is because of how good he is at baiting out resources.
Yeah.
Not because he's an excellent duelist. To be honest, I've been trying to wrap my hand around why he is a part of them, because I think Iron Man's just 10 times better, Storm is better. But when I had a discussion with Light, he's a Marvel Rivals pro, he explained that while Human Torch's strength is that he actually is able to, at least in coordinated environments, he's able to force out resources, and then we're able to take a safer engage. Same thing with Psylocke's prevalence in the game is because she can easily take those duels, use invis to get out. Namor is able to off angle very well because shift, and of course the pressure of the turrets, like good luck, you know, trying to contest him the second he decides to take an off angle.
Yeah,
I think it's like, sorry.
No, it's okay. It seems to me that while the healing sustain is incredibly high in the game, it's mostly rooted in big abilities and high single target sustain. The ability for teams to be able to generally keep them up versus AoE pressure, such as Human Torch, or just like damage to a lot of people, is quite low. So when you start doing that AoE pressure, it takes quite a lot of time for individual people on that team to get picked up, and that's probably why Human Torch is able to force out so many cooldowns. Not because they have that single target sustained pressure or enough to be able to force any particular person out, but because if anyone gets left behind for even a second or two, essentially if you got Psylocke on an angle or anyone else on an angle, they're threatened to die already, so they need to start pressing stuff. And that's probably one of the reasons why he's able to be a part of the meta in that way. It's interesting there because this is probably a symptom of what I think is pretty much missing from Rivals in general, which is low effort or high reliability healing sources. So for instance, like Brig Inspire, Lucio Healing Aura, Mercy Beam, all that kind of like residual stuff that doesn't really like do a lot. It doesn't really heal that much, let's be honest. It's not really able to keep up for the most part. But what it does, it makes it so that there's a low level of underlying sustain that allows individual characters to not be pressured out by, like, say, like 100 health being missing, because that can become a massive issue when you end up with everyone independently making their own decisions on how to live, and all making one step too far in terms of the amount of resources that you spend, because they really don't want to hedge their bets on not being healed and dying in a couple of seconds.
So on that same note, if there's something you don't mind me addressing, it's a character that I brought up initially in my reply, and I was trying to break down how it's like you said, single target pressure is what prevails the most in Rivals, right? Whether it's to bait out cooldowns, whether it's to try and isolate a target, it's all focused around, well, can we try to get this one person towards this other person, hyper focus them, and then see what happens from there. Late season 1 and early season 2, one of the characters that was finding himself, and I always thought he was an underrated pick in this regard, that could break this form of gameplay loop, was Moon Knight. Moon Knight was able to constantly bring in AoE damage pressure, and it, in my personal opinion, he was also one of the few characters that Loki really did not want to play into, because my problem right now is I think Loki and Luna, of course, they are the reason this whole group up composition is thriving, like by far. And even in the grand finals and throughout the tournament, if a team wanted to play that more team-centric, like stay in our little bubble goats play style, you can't have it work without Loki or without Luna. They need to be present as a duo for that to thrive. Now, ironically, this entire problem that we're talking about actually just got solved with the new hero, which is a more strict hit scan version of Moon Knight, which is the Phoenix. But Moon Knight, what we were able to figure out from the scrims at the time that I was playing, was Moon Knight really incentivized people from grouping up, and there was a huge detriment to the grouped up playstyle, because teams were constantly either forced to split, or in a couple of nanoseconds, Moon Knight would have his ultimate, and you all would be deleted before you could.
Yeah, I find it really interesting that Rivals has kind of like answered quite a few of these strategies with niche hero interactions, that instead of like the general flow of the game, like the whole like Wolverine is gaining treble tank comps and that sort of stuff. For some reason, they've decided niche hero interactions or kind of like AoE things that are part of the character is what they want to use to balance it, instead of just like the actual I don't know, the actual flow of the average character kit, if you
This
get
is
what
where
I mean.
things get worse because then they decided that for some strange reason Moon Knight needed to be nerfed. And I really didn't
Exactly,
agree
which
with
is where you
that
find
because
problems.
because I think outside of that, Moon Knight is a terrible DPS because he has a really fat hitbox, and if he's not playing into those grouped up compositions, he's one of the easiest targets, if not the easiest target in the game to dive, and he gets
Yes.
taken out really fast. If not, he's very easy to also isolate and trace with hit scan, etc., etc. So I didn't really appreciate that logic because again, it's like, well, then what counters this? One other particular case of this grouped up comp. Now,
Yeah.
in our little testing, a character that I still think is really underrated at this, that thrives off of people grouping up together because she's able to take a lot of advantage, and I will always force this agenda, is I think people underestimate Scarlet Witch's impact. Now, her E, which is like this little AoE time stop ability, was thriving a lot. Even in scrims, I had a chance to talk to Aramori about this. In testing, Scarlet Witch also turned out to be a character that could not only thrive in that composition, but she was forcing a small shift in the meta
It's
to tear apart
really
this
interesting
composition.
that their answer to quite a lot of these I think these are core problems in the game. The incentive to group up, play goatfish style, even if it's not goats in terms of being melee, it's goats in terms of survivability and the peel so people can't kind of like pierce into it and assassinate. Their answer is in terms of like 1 to 3 characters most of the time with these kind of like things. And the question is, right, is that just so fragile that it's so breakable? Right, like when we have hero bans, can you just like target ban like 1 to 2 characters, right? Maybe Wolverine and Scarlet Witch. Can you just ban 2 characters and then run a tank comp? Can you ban 2 characters and just run a treble support backline and be 100% fine? Like, it seems quite fragile at the high level.
They actually changed the way hero bans works to address this exact situation. Now, I don't know all the details, but if I'm remembering it correctly on top of my head, not only did each team first get the protect, but they also got to pick the bans for the opposite team. I do agree with you that a lot of its issues that they try to solve is rooted in these niche interactions. Another trend that I saw them do, which is again, it baffles my mind that they try to solve this problem, then all of a sudden they're like, no, never mind, we don't want to solve this problem. Is actually the history of Iron Man's changes. Iron Man was a great counter. Anywhere he saw play, teams were forced to split up. Otherwise, he built his ult on cooldown. And they specifically buffed his AoE in order to start dealing with these more gripped up compositions. In pro play, it's questionable, definitely questionable where Iron Man could be in. He saw play, then he was banned out and this and that. However, literally just now, they have decided to go ahead and nerf Iron Man's AoE. And then it just kind of goes back to, well, aren't we kind of feeding into the problem then?
Yeah, I guess the question is,
like we're lessening the options we have?
Yeah,
and
do you think there's any alternative, though, rather than these individual heroes countering very good ideas of what to do in terms of grouping up and stacking peel and other things like that? I assume it's a core philosophy that, first off, one support should be able to generally keep up a team, even if the one support is bad in practice, and that every single support should have enough peel to be able to survive with their buttons for kind of like 10 seconds against most pressure, and have that as a reaction. I feel like that's their purposely done to make it so that the average low rank player can generally exist and have an okay experience, which is done to kind of like ease the onboarding hurdle into the game and make it so that they can more or less get into the engagement, etc. Do you think there's an alternative with just those 2 choices? Because I'm not sure if there is. And then you just end up playing either roulette or just like flipping a coin every single time as to which single character you're going to use to be able to stop this happening. I'm sure it does work, but it seems so fragile to me.
I will say, at least, like, again, this is my own personal experience, and I know everybody's will differ. I will say that I would apply this case a lot more to Cloak and Dagger being the Moira of Marvel Rivals, because at the end of the day, I think a lot of lower ranked players, if you're looking at it from their perspective, a lot of them cannot play Luna Snow for their life, and that's because she's hit scan, her CC is difficult to land as well, and I don't mind Luna's kit. It's when we get to the ultimate where her problems begin. She's a different case. However, I do think like C&D and Loki, I don't think Loki's that difficult to play either. I think after a couple of games you understand his loop and how to max value on him.
He seems complicated from the outside, but when you put down 2 clones, you start left clicking, right?
So I think Cloak and Dagger is the Moira of this game by far, and she's too easy at doing everything you just mentioned. Right? However, I sadly cannot agree with the rest of the supports. I don't think Jeff by himself can keep up a team. Ultron can't do that either. Warlock literally cannot do that either.
Yeah, I think Warlock's clearly the outlier there in terms of the intent, right? Warlock, I feel, in my opinion, is intended not to be able to keep up.
Ultron as well.
Yeah,
Invisible Woman.
But then again, you think at the bare minimum base level, right? The depths of bronze, really like low level gameplay. I think they're targeting one support to be able to keep up a team, not just in general, but just like very, very low rank play where people just kind of like they turn on their console 1 hour a week and play 20 minutes of Rivals.
No, in that regard, the two worst offenders of this is Rocket and Cloak. Simply because I get in, I hold one button, and I get value. I agree.
Yeah.
As far as those two go, I can agree. But if it goes to Ultron, Adam, even Invisible Woman, they're actually trying to target this particular problem with Invisible Woman. And the rework to Jeff, I think it's like I can't for the life of me say that their current iterations they're not good at sustaining compositions at all. It's one of the reasons why Adam and Ultron only time they see plays if it's in a triple support comp. They just don't have enough to keep
and because quite a lot of their output is the offensive pressure, and it's pretty natural that if you have a more healing focused character, they can't put out as much offensive pressure. And that's the reason why triple support didn't take off immediately, because first off, the supports in the game didn't put out enough offensive pressure to start with, but second off, the player base didn't know how to put out offensive pressure with supports.
No, I still think they don't. A lot of them just don't understand how to output pressure on supports. But this is like a little support philosophy thing rather than it actually is like the accessibility of being able to pull it off. It's why I really like Invisible Woman's design. Is she secretly, like in ways that aren't related inherently to damage with her utility, she can hard carry fights if you know what you're doing. But because it's so hard to replicate that value repeatedly, people outright just give up at being able to replicate that. I mean, it's the same thing like if we flip on over to Overwatch, like the low elo problem is, why would I put in so much effort to aim on Ana or just like learn a little bit more of some other characters when Moira just gives me that instant feeling of satisfaction that I can pick up, like sustain my team, and then also bring value with this like big beam that they've unnecessarily buffed over time. So at least when it comes to Rivals, I think the worst offender is Cloak and Dagger, by far.
Yeah, no, it's really interesting to me. I like starting at the base rock of what they're trying to do and work out what kind of like falls out of it over time. And I think like if you just say, do you know what, every character more or less at very low levels should be able to generally keep the team up, and they should have peel abilities in order to be able to survive, then I think the GOAT's playstyle and being like at middle to long range does fall out pretty naturally from that design. Yeah, I guess the only reason why it doesn't do that in Overwatch is pretty obvious, like 2-2 roll lock, but also the fact that the supports don't have that level of sustain necessarily. Like you have Lucio with lower sustain, you have Brig that is lower sustain but able to peel. You have a kind of like a more textured format in terms of the support outputs, and when you remove that texture, when you just make it okay, well everyone can more or less put out 120 HPS onto a single target with some kind of like auxiliary healing on top of that, and they get so much of their value from that ult charge generation and using that ult on cooldown and the power of their ultimate that they can't step off main, then really I don't see a different way of balancing other than just saying, you know what, I'm just gonna hit them with a couple of very specific hero-based interactions that stop that being oppressive when it's stacked up too high.
Sure, but I just want to kind of take us over to Overwatch for just 1 second right now. In my personal opinion, I might like ruffle some feathers here, but I think a lot of that not happening is blanket nerfed by the DPS passive. Remove that for a season and see what happens then. And I feel like that that DPS passive, as much as we don't like passives, I know you're in agreement with me that the DPS passive is absurd, especially where it is at right now.
Personally, for me, it's ruining all fun that I have in the game.
Yeah,
I fully agree. Really damaging my ability.
You should see the state of the state of Stadium. It just completely ruined that mode for me. But when it comes down to it, I think one of the things that at least that I can vouch Overwatch for is it has this little blanket running with it right now, where it's like, hey, we have this little DPS passive, and if things get bad, we'll just like bump it up a little bit, and oh well, now the supports are upset. Well, okay, I guess we just revert it.
Yeah, and if you think of it from a design perspective, around the same idea as Rivals, right? Rivals wanted to keep everyone sustained relatively high so that one person can more or less keep up a team, more or less at the very low ranks. Sorry, I just hit my mic. And in the same way, I feel like it's a lot easier to do that with Overwatch. If you just don't care as much about the numbers and say, while somebody's in combat, nobody can keep them up regardless, you can then start buffing quite a lot of the low throughput healers in order to be like roughly the same level, and so have a more homogeneous experience at the very low rank. Specifically because, well, when they're in combat, they're never going infinite anyway. Even at the high ranks where everything's stacked up on top of each other. So I do think in that way it makes it a lot easier to make a very easy onboarding experience for low ranks in terms of support gameplay.
On that same note, I think that, as you've already mentioned, that is what they're aiming for. Like they want the experience to be easily accessible, and at least on this matter, I think they've made it clear with what they were initially when they made their season. Was it one video, or there was a little dev interview where they said that this is something that they want in their game. And at least as far as my opinion on it is like, well, okay, that's fine. What I want to see is consistency in the way, like, how do you balance it? Like, for example, I think it's absurd that Luna still has 12 seconds on her ultimate, but on the flip side, Mantis, Invisible Woman, and Cloak and Dagger are all relative to one another in ultimate strength. So it's come to the point that I actually don't mind playing against Invisible Woman, Mantis, and also, for what it's worth, there's a lot of windows to even counter these support ultimates. But I cannot speak the same way for Luna's ultimate's current state, and there's very few ultimates in the game that can deal with them, because their answer is that, well, we do kind of want a rock, paper, scissors. But then the problem is the second rock starts to actually beat scissors, they go ahead and turn rock into mush, into paper.
Yeah, I'm not saying there's not a way to make the game work in this flow, right? It's very clear that if you have enough things that are options in order to beat one particular overpowered type of thing, then it's fine, right? The question is, with the amount of churn that Rivals is intending for its game, with the amount of team ups and other things like that, the fast patches, the quick release for heroes, will they be able to design these kind of like hammers to like hit down the nails enough or fast enough to be able to keep up with it? And if one takes over, then you end up with a very sharp kind of like gameplay where you end up with like high extremes of quite a lot of the things.
I would say that there is 2 cases in the support role where they have shown that they're willing to immediately pick up the hammer and throw them out. One of them has been Mantis, which I think everybody that has played Rivals fundamentally agrees that whatever the hell they did to Mantis was extremely unjustified, and she just saw her first set of buffs to help her feel a lot better, and it was all because of Luna. I'm gonna keep it real. And then on the other side, Jeff the Landshark. I mean, Jeff became the best DPS in the game, and that is clearly what they not intended for him. And they just outright, in literally half the season, reworked the character and threw him back as a proper dedicated support.
Okay, so do you want to get a tinfoil hat on with me?
Yeah, sure.
So I watched a design frame video. It's only got 51k views. It's modern matchmaking, the case study from basically Rivals. It's got a load of investigation into EOMM essentially. From that, it's pretty clear that if the algorithm isn't already smart enough to tell that you're a Jeff that is DPSing, and it's not clear that the algorithm, although obviously this is something that you can easily apply AI to, the whole purpose of everything in these systems appears to be to reduce churn and reduce the amount of people clicking off the game. It's pretty obvious, but they very clearly spell out ways in which different categories have different churn risks associated with them, with wins and loss streaks. So for instance, support would give up on the game 5% more if they went 3 losses then 1 win, instead of DPS when they do the opposite.
I think either I've seen the video or I read the article myself.
And my thought was, one of the possibilities with Jeff is that they purposely turned him into non-DPS because the algorithm was having a tough time predicting whether he was being played as a DPS or as a support, and therefore had a really tough time predicting his churn risk based on win or loss streaks. So essentially they reverted him into a more main style support, the same as the others, to increase predictability within their systems and allow them to basically apply their algorithm more accurately to players. That's my tinfoil hat theory. The change of every single support to be more or less homogeneous apart from Adam, in terms of I stand on main, I generally heal, I use my ult on cooldown, I do a bit of DPS when it's applicable, but I don't off angle for the most part. Maybe I do a bit of DPS off angle support, but not deep, right? I don't go away from main to do that. I feel like the reverting of most of the supports to this kind of like a playstyle, and even stuff like Spider-Man. If you think you have an EOMM system and you have a Spider-Man character that's incredibly variable on that output, right? Individual Spider-Man players from game to game are going to be completely stomping or doing nothing, incredibly feast or famine. I always look at that and I think maybe the point is that we're increasing the predictability, right? Maybe that's the point, because I think it's pretty clear that Rivals has a full algorithm-based EOMM system that is changing whether you're more likely or less likely to win games by at least 5% in either direction based on your churn risk. I think that is pretty obvious. So the question is, are they changing designs in order to speak to that or not? And I just don't know the answer. I feel like it probably is true. obviously I can see the design argument, right? Everything that's not intended, they don't want to not be intended, right? The Thor stuff with Awakening Rune botting, that was very obviously what the devs intended the average playstyle to be with Thor from the start. They didn't intend it to be kidnapping people into your team. They didn't intend it to just be always playing for boops and then just like spacing around main. They intended him to be like farming his form and going into that form and then using the other stuff when it's relevant. So my question is it just the devs being normally reactionary towards new things or weird things being found in their game, or is it specifically to increase the predictability of those type of characters?
You know, honestly, I'll respectfully disagree, and I would say that it was a reaction to Jeff just going completely in a direction that he just shouldn't have. I wouldn't say it was for a trend, because I could just use the argument that the Jeff players had an insane uproar. I don't know if you saw what happened at the Reddit, at the comment section. So I would say that, well, I don't understand how those players are now going to have a better time, since you inherently ruined all the fun that whatever the character had. It was just, the design was inherently toxic. With the Luna team up, who already is a meta, like, defining character, you now have this, like, unkillable DPS in your backline who can literally reduce his hitbox. It enters safely, exit safely, take all the off angles of the word, snipe you from across the map, and then proceed to CC you if he's landing those shots. So I genuinely think that once they realize that, oh crap, okay, well, this is not even Adam, this is not Ultron, this is something too much. That's when they decide, okay, we need to pull Jeff back a little bit, and that's why in his current iteration, there is no incentive to go to DPS.
And it's interesting because the first thing I saw, or I said when I saw Jeff originally, was they've missed a real big trick not making this character's healing auto-aim, right? This is the e-girl character, right? This is the one everyone wants to come into the game to play, and they've made it actually quite hard for a very low rank player to be able to support on them. There was like a pipeline when the game first started of people picking up Jeff, then going on to Cloak and Dagger immediately, when they couldn't necessarily aim because they never picked up control in their life. It was interesting to me because I feel like they missed out on such a good opportunity to get a massive influx of players into the game and stay in the game. And even in this form now, I don't think this form is that much better for the average low-level player, which if any character is going to be aimed at the low-level player, surely the cute shark character should be the one, right? Like surely that's the intent, but they flubbed it so badly in my opinion.
For Jeff, yeah, no, I agree. But I've come to terms with where Jeff is now. I kind of put him over there because I still think Jeff, like, with some of his mechanics, I think it's too much. I think where he is now is fine. Like, he's an entry-level character. He has some annoyances that people at low level don't like, and then he drops off one or two ranks after that.
And I personally, for me, I understand that the Jeff flanking playstyle was toxic in the way that it worked, right? It wasn't great. But however,
it even saw play in pro play.
Yeah,
like,
in my opinion, it was important texture for the game. And when you start removing texture like that, emergent complexity, things you don't expect, you really are narrowing the scope of types of things in your video game, in my opinion. And even if it was toxic, I'd rather them just keep it and then just like increase the bubbles cooldown so it matters forcing bubbles, right? He had 6, why don't you just make it so that it's a reasonable cooldown so he can't stay in your backline forever, or it actually matters when he misuses 3 at a time.
I don't think the cooldown from the numbers perspective was the issue. I think the fact that it did burst healing to him and he could stack it meant that there was no window for vulnerability for him to be punished. I think that was the core issue with him that the other supports don't have. Loki has a ton of ways he can survive, but his window should be that, well, after you get the runes or the crystals or whatever people call it out the way, he's a very exposed support and it's a high cooldown. Adam, after the shift is gone, every support kind of has this little gimmick going that if this is gone, it is like they are now open to being destroyed. Yes. Jeff didn't have that. Jeff could survive, and perhaps the only character.
My intent is to give him that punishability window, but still retain the kind of like immortal, infinite healing style, but only temporarily. So like if you push him out and he uses 3 bubbles, he's essentially AFK for a long period of time or has to go back to main, right? To preserve some of that kind of like identity of flanking and being a nuisance and not being killable, but at the same time make it so that doing that spends a valuable resource that you take a long time to regen. That was kind of like my intent, right? Like, so just trying to preserve some of that while also making it so that pushing him out does matter, because if you force him for 300 health, he's going to be using something that, and that was the problem with the character. The bubbles just regen so much that you spend 3 bubbles on yourself. You could go in 4 times and spend 3 bubbles all 4 of those times before you run out of bubbles, right? Like, it was just basically an infinite amount of healing. And sure, like I do think, you know what, taking away like maybe 30 of that or 50 of that and putting it on a heal over time would have been good. But you know what, I do kind of like the idea that a character can just be infinite in your backline and unkillable for a period of time. Just like it was just obviously crazy overtuned in my mind.
But that type of character, I think, is what they intended to exist in the DPS role, and you already have
Yes.
that with well, the damage dealers that are designed to do that. Now, me personally, whenever I've looked at support design, at least in hero shooters, I think I always care about trade-offs and opportunity cost. That if a character has a window to be able to execute something and they're really good at it, there should be a trade. That's why I really adored the original designs of Zenyatta, Mercy, and Lucio, because each of them, at least back in original Overwatch, followed this design space that they excel at one thing, but then they fall off at another thing. I felt like progressively Overwatch kind of lost that, but then I'm not saying Rivals is perfect at it either, but the hope that I got so far has been with, again, Invisible Woman's design, where she's a character that excels at a particular style of gameplay, which is, again, those grouped up, unfortunately, those grouped up comps, but they don't like that, so they're nerfing her healing from that AoE perspective and instead trying to help her out from a single target perspective where overall it wouldn't affect her gameplay loop that much, but she'll feel a lot better to play. But her trade-off is that she's garbage at damage. She cannot do damage to save her life, but her utility is very good.
The pull is crazy, and as we already said,
the push is underrated, and also
in that middle range poke comps, being able to assassinate with pulls or to make space is very valuable. Like the pull and push is crazy valuable on the kit. I'd say it's about like 40% of her value in total.
Against dive comps, her shift was incredibly underrated. You could literally outright save teams from dives with the shift because it outright cancelled abilities. It was one of the main countermeasures against Wolverine, that your Invisible Women would just time the shift. Wolverine comes in, really easy character to predict. He's very, very visible and loud. And the moment he just comes in, you just shift your general tank and he survives. There's nothing Wolverine can do.
It's interesting to me. I feel like quite a lot of the problems with Rivals kind of like they knit together into a what would you do otherwise kind of answer. What's your opinion on Rivals' lack of things like Harmony or...
I wouldn't necessarily say there's a lack of deep off-angle support, because originally in Season 0, Mantis was able to take those playstyles to go off on those off-angles because she had that original speed boost that kept her being able to get in and get out safely. And also, if somebody could reach her in time to punish her, her sleep spore would just halt them in place. So that either she confirms the kill right there or uses that time to basically get out. Now, current Mantis is a completely different topic, but the Harmony Orb thing is actually something that was experimented with another version of Dive with Ultron and the logic with his little bots and nano drones or whatever they're called. Is that we're trying to shoehorn him in dive comp in this play style where you throw it on the Venom, you throw it on the Magic, and they're allowed to now take much more. Especially a character like Magic and Spider-Man, the second they have it, they can take a very long extended duel that they perhaps couldn't do before. So I think the potential is there, but the core problem that comes back to the first spot, which is that the GOAT's playstyle is a lot more encouraged. This is my personal hot take. I think the community is too immature to even experiment with these comps. I think they're too scared. I'll say it. I think the community is scared. It's something that I've discussed here and there where it's like, yeah, well, we could try this. We could take the risk and perhaps it even works out. But is it worth it when this is just a safer and easier thing to do? So I would rather...
And it's maturity in two different ways, right? It's maturity in terms of education of hero-based shooters and lack of maturity to actually experiment.
And the first thing you could do to at least alleviate these grouped up comps to excel, again, before I get to the Phoenix, is Cloak and Dagger Bubble really needs an appropriate nerf. I think that is the worst offender. It literally holds low elo grouped up comps together for free. So if you try to play against a low elo grouped up comp without C&D, you can just have the time of your life.
And
it's a different game.
Beacon as well.
And Loki, I was coming to Loki just now. And now at Pro Play, it's not C&D. The upgraded version of C&D, because there's a better ultimate to use 90% of the time, is Loki. And those two, I think, are, at least in terms of support design and allowing supports to even perhaps experiment and do something else, those two abilities, not even the characters perhaps themselves, is what's holding back the supports, just the entire role by itself. Because Ultron allowed for some really interesting things to happen in the composition that he got featured in, which was a huge surprise to a lot of people, since it was predicted that Ultron would be bad because low healing, lol. And then, when Loki first released, the playstyle everybody wanted to do on Loki was the flank Loki playstyle, which was incredibly fun to execute. I'm not going to sit here and pretend it wasn't. But then it's like, well, why should I do this one little risky thing when I can just kind of go back to my team and sit with them?
Exactly, and you get such a large amount of your value just by rotating on anyway that it's not good to do these things. It's just it seems heavily disincentivized by the game, right? I think that's my problem.
I also, as far as the skill floor heroes go in Marvel Rivals, this is perhaps something that maybe is not as bad in Overwatch as it is in Rivals, is that if you look at the skill floor characters like Jeff and Rocket, like if these are the characters that people first first pick up to play support because they're new to the hero shoot or whatever, they also just incentivize you to just sit behind the team and keep yourself safe. There's not really anything in their kit that tells you, oh, at least Jeff now, that tries to communicate to the player that, hey, by the way, you can kind of go away and do something else. Now, I guess you could argue maybe Jeff's ult is the only thing that perhaps allows for a very unique form of gameplay making on support. I actually really like his new ultimate as well. I think the idea is actually very cool.
I think the concept behind Jeff from the devs is that you can be on main, and then you can go off for 5 seconds on an off angle, use all your right clicks, and then try and put pressure on or assassinate somebody, then go back to main. Right? That's kind of like where the devs see it. It just seems like the devs are really struggling to incentivize players in a way that gets them to do that type of stuff and not just sit behind their team, right?
One more thing on that same note, right, is something I've always thought about, even for support, because I see a lot of tweets, Reddit threads, and this and that. Is I also just think it's perhaps a support player mindset to fall into this gameplay loop, and that was actually coming to the point that I wanted to talk about with Jeff and Rocket, is that it builds this like psychological thought process that this is the safest thing for me to do. I should continue to do this thing because like nobody can blame me that this is the wrong thing. Like, for example, let's say you go on a Loki flank and it doesn't work out. Well, now people blame you because you weren't behind healing. Like the team would have carried you. Yeah. The list goes on. You see the same thing happen.
The trouble is, it's such obvious value to the rest of the team when they use one of the very powerful support ultimates that obviously if they don't have the support ult at the time, they're going to get flamed by the team because they were doing something else. Now, we could actually complement that by maybe like increasing the amount of ult charge they get through damage. That would probably be a reasonable
I think the game needs a global ultimate charge, just around 15 to 20%.
Yeah.
The game just needs a 20% ult charge increase, and I think it's fine. It still maintains the chaotic peel of the game, but it gives just this window for neutral gameplay to become a lot more important.
Yeah.
Because that's what I liked about Invisible Woman, her kit. From not a damage perspective, but utility-wise leans into generating value that doesn't necessarily involve healing.
She's one of the rare ones that has neutral power.
Yeah, I really like
especially her pull. Obviously, at high level, you're saying you use it more to peel, which I think is bad if you use it more to peel. Maybe you should increase the cooldown if you use it to push instead.
It depends on the map. Honestly, it depends on the map.
Yeah, it's one of those situations where one of my main problems with Rivals is so little happening in neutral in comparison. I'm not saying nothing happens in neutral, but I think so little happens. The trouble is, if you have support ultimates so good, right, like they're such a large portion of the support role's value, then how do you incentivize the support to ever go off main and do more interesting things? Sure, at the high level, people kind of like understand that they can do it, and Ultron Beacon's going to be used on off angles the same way Luna's Beacon is used on off angles.
I think for just this particular topic, let's leave high level out of this because that's a different problem entirely.
Yeah.
But at least the average player, the Invisible Woman problem is that it's hard to somehow communicate to the player that this one thing you just did was good. Like somebody that's new to hero shooter will never understand that, oh, me pushing away this target is good, me pulling somebody in is good. They'll never understand. They'll be like, oh, I don't understand, like this is stupid. I pulled somebody in to get my team killed. What did I just do? You know, like that's the first thought process that I actually heard from one of my friends. And I was like, you know what? You're a lost cause. I ain't even gonna bother. But like, when it came down to Ultron, I think Ultron did a much better job at this because the entire marketing around him is that, well, this is the DPS support and you have to play him DPS style. And then even, I didn't want to bring in higher level play into this, so let's just say at the highest ranks, the hyper fast aggressive Ultron dive comps is something that happens. With the Iron Man shoehorned in to bring like that initial sustain that, okay, we'll take this little poke war, we'll get in position, and then everybody goes in, Ultron has ultimate, and we take a really fast fight, we win, and then it goes from there. I think that is some place where Ultron was kind of a light in the darkness that, okay, because one of the things I discussed with a good friend was, I think the reason there were so many heal circles was I think that was just the devs also being afraid of a ban meta. Because I don't know if you've played League of Legends, but like that is something that a dev over there talked about, that sometimes a mirrored ultimate or ability concept is shared across characters because they're afraid that if a certain ban meta happens, it might allow certain other characters to excel perhaps in a way that they shouldn't. And then we should, and then there should be a little option. So I think perhaps maybe it was a little bit of an oversight, but I'm happy that at least when it came to number one, Jeff's rework, number two, Ultron's direction, that they didn't lean into just, okay, you get an AoE circle, you get an AoE circle, everybody gets an AoE circle. They didn't lean into that. So I'm really happy that now I guess the nail in the coffin would be to see what the next support does. Because if that's an AoE circle, then it's a bad sign. But if it's not an AoE circle, then it's thumbs up.
It'll be an AoE circle that gives you 10% movement speed or something.
No, I'm kidding. But like, I think also inherently one of the problems is I think the devs, at least for Rivals, do lean into giving supports the fastest satisfaction as possible, and that's something that I think, like, if you look at low-level Overwatch, metal rank Overwatch,
Yep.
that is something that a lot of those players want too.
I think it's necessary. I think there's a massive support player base that is pretty
I'm a little bit
grassroots.
50-50.
And
Yeah, I'm a little bit 50-50 on that.
it's a tank player base that we always known have been struggling. I think the support player base and the people that want to generally sit back and do general healing has always been massive in these type of games.
Yeah,
so I
of
don't
course.
think you needed
You need another game
to
types.
cater to them in that way. I think it's absolutely fine to just leave them with a diverse set of things they can do and let them filter themselves into the couple of characters that are a little bit easier or a little bit more botty, while making the rest of the characters more diverse, like Ultron.
Yeah, but these are also the people that are the most likely to spend money on your game. So if you want that cash coming in for your next PvE Overwatch 3, you're going to need them to start spending a little bit more. You know what I'm saying? So it's not a coincidence that playstyle is on Luna Snow.
Yeah, it would be
and then
very
the
interesting to
diversified
tell
playstyle,
who's spending the most money between the roles, wouldn't it? And we all know what the real answer is. We all know it's
yeah,
it'd be interesting to see what the
believe-
actual split is.
I think the devs care more about leaning into that. Well, what is this fantasy that these people want right away, and let's just give them that. The DPS role is an echo of this as well. Like a lot of people that have played hero shooters, they enjoy the aspect of, well, I want to go big as quickly as possible, right? And at least majority, not all, majority of the characters in DPS have some way, especially in their ultimates, to just immediately give you that feeling of, wow, look at that, you just really popped off, you know? And that was actually one of the biggest appealing points for Overwatch once upon a time.
So personally, from my point of view, there's two things, like real big core gameplay elements missing from Rivals that are the reasons why I like this genre, and they're not missing. They're kind of like disincentivized by the game. The first is just off-angle support in general. Obviously, if you have a Psylocke on an angle, you want to support it and keep it active continuously. But I do feel like Overwatch has a lot more consistency in that kind of like way.
Yeah, sure.
Mantis, sure. But I feel like even then, Mantis's big pulse of impulse healing forces you to be always within LOS of the person when they're active. Whereas
at least comparatively, her healing is actually very low.
Yeah.
And it's why she's been out the meta, unless it's triple support.
Yeah, plus wanting angles, reinforcing angles, the ways that different support levels interact with certain different characters. That's kind of like what makes it interesting to me in general. And I think there's not enough texture in the game in terms of Rivals. Sure, they're bringing some of it in, and I've always said there's no reason why they can't bring this in, especially with Ultron Beacon. But even the fact that Ultron Beacon's an AoE effect, right? The fact that it's an AoE effect disincentivizes you for putting it on one person. If you had two individual orbs that went on two different targets, then you could much more easily just say, oh, that person's going off into fucking Narnia, let's put one on them and use that, right? So I feel like that part of the game's been like disincentivized, and I don't think there's a reason to, aside from being scared of pocketing, right? Being scared of the Mercy with hit scan problem. I think that's probably why. What do you think the reasoning is there? Or whether it's true at all to peel
I would respectfully disagree, because the Bruce Banner Captain America dive was utilizing the bubble onto Captain America plus Iron Fist in that exact way.
Yes.
So I would say that again, like if you nerf like those support sustainability cooldowns, you will see the feedback about that aggression in the engagement being given to the player, that hey, this was something good that you did because you actually got value out of it. But because you have those strong support cooldowns, that like the Loki crystals, the cloak and the worst, again, like I said, cloak and dagger is the worst because it's the most popular one that you'll see in the low and metal ranks, and as you go, that's the easiest one, because even though it's just a little AoE circle that gives healing, it is able to, my favorite word, ruin breakpoint interactions for tanks specifically from feeling rewarded from an aggressive play. And then they're forced to just like back off and then try again and hope to God a DPS comes in with them and find value. So there's a lot of potential there, and I still really enjoy the game, but I think it's like, you know, we're almost there if we can just look at these little things on the side.
I'm concerned there. You said that the Hulk and Captain America team up, allowing one person to put aggressive resources into the other person, right? That was what you're talking about.
Yeah, so generally the way the dive would work is the two of them would go together, and assuming Iron Fist is there as well, the Hulk bubble gets spread out. I think you know this, gets spread out in a little AoE. So you've now caught 3 people in the dive that have already taken different cooldowns, have now survived them, and in the best scenario can now overcommit and force the aggression rather than be forced to back off. And that is one way that is
like, I agree that exists, don't get me wrong. I think this is what you're seeing there is something that's like so niche that it's essentially not in the game for the majority of player base there. Sure,
I
it
mean,
does
it
exist.
was
And
replicated and ranked quite a bit.
that
Like
is the
we were,
purpose of Hulk. Don't get me wrong. That's the purpose of the design
yeah,
of the
yeah, yeah.
bubble. To use it aggressively into things. But the fact that you can play these type of characters without Hulk and them still have to exist has made it so that the devs
Yeah.
have to have designed these characters to be able to do this type of thing, maybe less to a degree, but do this type of thing without the bubble as well. Meaning that essentially what they've done is they've made it so that they can't do as much with the bubble because the proportion of extra stuff they can do is just less. So I look at Reinhardt with Diva, right? Reinhardt Diva, 2 seconds of DM, crazy ridiculously good, right? I'd say Reinhardt does about 80 to 100% more in terms of aggressive stuff with Diva on the field. With Rivals, with that Hulk bubble, I see it and I think like, sure, they can keep committing, but they're committing into infinite sustainability stuff. And also they're committing, but all of the characters that have to have already been given so many resources that they can more or less commit anyway, just in a less aggressive manner before they disengage. So I feel like because of the lack of extremes there, the game kind of like washes out for the most part.
I felt like Rivals actually took this the reverse direction, where rather than tanks enabling each other to do more, they
Yes.
rather leaned into tanks allowing DPS to do more. At the moment, Bruce enables Namor to do more. Before
Yes.
it was Iron Man. You have Doctor Strange who's enabling Scarlet to do more. You had Venom enabling Spider-Man to do more. I think their general idea and approach is a little bit more, well, we would rather make it a lot more obvious from a tank to DPS perspective,
Yes.
rather than a tank to tank perspective. That isn't the particular 4-combo brawl poke tank hybrid, because I would argue otherwise that as far as Doctor Strange, Emma Frost, Groot to go, they do use their resources interchangeably towards one another in order to allow for more aggressive plays or on the other side, passive plays.
Yeah, it's interesting to me that you're saying about being used more on DPS than on tanks in terms of the bursty type of resources that you can allow other people to do, or the bursty stuff that certain tanks allow DPS to do. I've always thought that bursty resources applied to DPS is kind of like a awkward design direction to go, specifically because DPS have such sharp interactions with other characters that if you make it incredibly good to always apply those bursty DPS resources when it matters, essentially what you're doing is you're completely tipping every duel or every interaction those DPS get into being lethal in their direction. Whereas when you incentivize it to being used on tanks and on doing more tank pressure, essentially what you're doing is you're allowing the tanks to take more space instead of be more lethal or other things like that.
I think, at least as far as the comparison goes for now, I think Rivals doesn't really also have the full tank roster fleshed out. Overwatch has 8 years behind it to where tanks not only have evolved their playstyles and at least right now are incentivized to be a lot more aggressive at times because of the DPS passive. Rivals is still in the early phase of, well, like for example, I mean, people would have never predicted that Captain America would have been the meta-defining tank for Season 2. He was being called the worst tank in the game. And then all of a sudden you have like a little bit of switch up, and then there you go.
100%.
Like with the Hulk, like you now have a comp that's diving in, that's forcing out resources, surviving, overextending duels, frustrating support players like crazy. But my point is I think, like, I agree. I think as far as at least the dive-centric composition and Rivals go, which is when I send you my bullet points, I said like dive is currently the worst offender of this, and why I think like they can't pull off dive in that game. They don't have the dive roster just figured out properly just yet. However, I do think with Season 3, the thing could be that missing link. Because with his new ability and rework to the way it works, it might actually just incentivize that. We're almost at year 1. I think as far as the first year is gone, there's certainly interesting liberties being taken here and there. I think they have their poke brawl way more figured out than they have figured out their dive. I think that is like the biggest takeaway today, is poke brawl is a lot more figured out than dive, and I think but perhaps there's potential with the Thing next season, which a lot of people, including the pros, are banking on, that the Thing is just about to make a completely new version of the game with what he's able to do. So I think that's great. They took the most one-dimensional tank ever created and actually gave him a lot of depth, which I find very surprising. And I hope it's just thumbs up from there. And support also gets figured out from what we've discussed with sustainability and leaning more into perhaps giving supports a way to feel feedback that, hey, this one thing I did, being more aggressive is a good thing.
Then one of those things everyone always says, like, supports in Overwatch. I said they've disincentivized being aggressive with certain things they've done in the future. But it's always been good to be generically aggressive on support in all games. Like, that's always been good. It's just hard to give feedback, and it's hard to have people understand that in the low ranks when they get so much of their value based off ult charge and ult cycling, right?
I will say one more thing before we move on to the Overwatch topic is I think Overwatch forced support players to feel it with the DPS passive. They really did not like that, and I mean history is kind of repeating itself yet again, which is why I feel like the current balance pack that we do have on Overwatch, most of it might just see a small revert. If not, I'll be genuinely surprised. And like they are forced to feel that, well, you know, healing is not the best thing all the time, so let's have you go do something else.
Yeah.
And because of that, whether they like it or not, they're forced to evolve their playstyles slowly and more progressively over time.
Yeah.
I guess the ones that surprised us the most was like all those Moira TikTok, despite how much I despise the character for being a low kill floor, very this and that. I think the one thing I could praise about it was the fact that that particular community really enjoyed the whole, well, now I get to yes,
It showed all support players the different playstyle, whereas some people just wouldn't have realized it. Right? It's just a general community education thing, and I was hopeful that Jeff would do the same for Rivals players, but apparently he needed to be shot in the back of the head. So you know,
he was very toxic.
I guess to summarize, I'm just a bit concerned for me that dive cannot be fixed in Rivals without toning down the sustain cooldown for supports, and that they don't want to turn down those sustain cooldown for supports. It's very concerning because I feel like dive is just, for the most part, unless you have two people, turned off completely at the low level by cooldowns, and therefore there's no reason to stay in for a mid-length of time. You're either in and out instantly and just hitting instantly.
I would disagree. I would say it works way more in low elo than it does in high elo. High elo dive just doesn't exist, but in low elo dive is everywhere.
That's true. Actually,
case in point is like Black Panther and all the magic rage bait like tweets and everything. Those two characters, Black Panther, Magic, they literally disappear.
Yes.
And that's just because
I feel like those characters, those dives, work not through anything else but getting there before the cooldowns come out. Right? They get in, they get their insta-kill, then they fuck off because people don't react that fast in low ranks. My concern is the moment that they react, these characters are basically turned off for 5 to 8 seconds, and then in low ranks it can feel very swingy and very oppressive. And if you don't adjust the bubbles and this type of stuff and give them more soft ways of escaping, or get them to have to preempt the diver coming in some way, shape or form, then I don't think you can really fix dive at the low rank or the high rank. I think they're in a bit of a net. I think all the problems kind of like commingle.
Yeah, I can agree with that.
Cool. I guess we should.
Yeah, sure. Honestly, I would go on way too long because this is such a. I told you, like, I've not had anybody to actually sit down and discuss this with. So, like, it is exciting. Like, I would yap about it a while because there's so much perspectives to be had. But outside of that, like, it is what it is.